Vice President of Products for Xebia Labs, providers of application delivery automation solutions. Andrew is a cloud service delivery and automation expert and has been part of the shift to more automated application delivery platforms. In his spare time as a developer, he worked on Multiverse, the open source STM software transactional memory implementation, contributes to Apache JClouds, the leading cloud library, and maintains the Scala Puzzlers site. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew. Switch to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Andre. Thanks, everyone, for cramming back in here. I was thinking whether I should try to do a kind of Steve Ballmer impersonation, but then I decided against it. I didn't feel like shouting like, deliver us, deliver us. No, that's not necessarily a smart move. So yes, rather technical bio there, and of course I'm very proud of that, but I think today we'll try and cover a bunch of things. So the About Me slide, obligatory. Well, long story short, I've been on both sides of the DevOps divide. I try to spend as much time as I can really keeping my hands dirty with technical stuff. Now, obviously my day job is I'm a VP of products for Xebia Labs. We have a whole bunch of interesting tools for continuous delivery in DevOps, and I'm not going to talk about any of them here because this is not a talk about tools. If you're interested, then come and speak to me. You know, I'll have the sticker back on my forehead. Just give us a shout. We're just around the corner and see what we do. All right. So yeah, this is basically all. So we help companies with continuous delivery and DevOps problems, and of course, ideally do what every other company does. We make stuff faster, better, and cheaper. Who would say no to that? I mean, it's like whoever stood up and said, "Well, we're going to make your process slower, more expensive, and less reliable." It's hardly something to say. All right. I have 45 minutes today, so if I speak even faster than usual, then you'll have to forgive me a little bit. We have quite a bit of material to get through here, but I'll try and make it as comprehensible as possible. Basically, I'm going to spend a minuscule amount of time on a short continuous delivery recap because we're already 3 presentations in. I doubt that we need to do much of that today. But then I'm going to specifically talk about 3 things that I think are very important and relevant in this space, namely CD tooling, practice, culture, and not just about CD, it's really a general topic, but we'll obviously focus on CD here and how they're related to each other. And especially the challenge of, well, if you don't have that culture yet, what can you do in terms of going about bootstrapping this? And I'll talk a little bit about quick win chasm and what the challenge there is that we see with a lot of the people we work with and how you can go about crossing that, and then we'll go from the nice theoretical culture stuff into some practical examples of what you can actually do to get started. All right, I'm going to grab my big glass of water here. So, yeah, what is continuous delivery? Well, this is just, there's a couple of definitions out there. Obviously, this is just the definitions. I think it's on Wikipedia. Set of patterns and best practices that help software teams dramatically improve the pace and quality of their software delivery. That's lovely, isn't it? But, well, first of all, let me just do a quick show of hands here. So who here would say that they already do continuous delivery? Who's looking at implementing it this year? Bigger number. Who's doing Agile? Okay, lots of hands going on. Well, we have some interesting tidbits for you as we go on. So when this boils down to like the serious discussion, if you ask people, so you're doing or you're interested in doing continuous delivery, and then you sort of say, well, what does that mean actually? Then, some of the things that we've heard, what is it? Is it we build a delivery pipeline or multiple pipelines? Are we going to just try to implement a particular type of release process maybe? Or it's a kind of methodology we use in IT to do stuff, whatever that may be? Or is it really a different way of doing business? And I don't think there's a right answer, and it really depends on who you're talking to, of course. But one thing I would very much like to just throw out there is something to think about. Is what I call the track and trace story. And those of you who've heard it before, apologies. But we're in the supply chain business, ultimately. We ship software, but that's no different in many ways from any other supply chain businesses, T-shirts or anything else. And if we think about just in my daily life as a consumer of stuff, when I used to order a book, say, how did that work like 5 or 10 years ago? I called up some mail order company. I had this ancient catalog that they sent me 3 years ago, and I tried to pick out the right one, and I give them my credit card number over the phone, and I'd feel really bad about that. And then, they'd say, yes, we'll ship it, and eventually there'll be this black hole of no information. And then a couple of weeks later, something would arrive, which is not quite what I ordered or whatever. There's many different facets of our life where we are aware of this experience, whether it's ordering takeaway or just anything from mail order. And nowadays, if you think back to that, it's like you wouldn't accept that for a minute. I mean, now you go on Amazon, you hit a button, it's in the shopping cart, you get a tracking number, they tell you where it is, when it's going to be ready, and you basically have full predictability and insight through the process. Or if you order sushi, they can tell you it's on that little scooter, it's going around, wherever, and it's going to be there in 8.5 minutes. That's the kind of expectation we have nowadays as consumers in our daily lives. What's it like consuming IT services? Most of the time, our customers, your customers, or maybe you are the customers, it's like that terrible old way it was 5 years ago. It's like, oh, we'll give you this bunch of requirements, and then 6 months later you bring stuff that wasn't what we ordered anyway. And it's terrible. It's a process that you would never accept as a consumer nowadays. And I think the really interesting thing about continuous delivery, it can make IT delivery what we expect in our daily lives. You can release stuff faster, better, make it more in tune with what people want, and give them more insight as they go through that process. It's obviously a very big goal, and a lot of this talk is about the practice of getting there and about other things. But this is not just about putting together a bit of technology and gluing it together with some scripts. And oh, look, I've got this new technology platform. This is about potentially changing the way you interact with your business. You can make IT delivery a modern process, not a process from like 1985. Okay, so much for that aside. So, why continuous delivery? Well, there's obviously a couple of reasons. It's a hot trend. It's the cool thing to do. We do a survey every year about what's happening in the automation space, and DevOps and continuous delivery have been popping up for the last couple of years. It's just one of the things people want to achieve this year. Certainly in relation to DevOps, I'll talk about that a little more in a second. There are some clear business values generally associated with continuous delivery. It seems to be much easier to justify this as a business project than, say, DevOps, which, great, we'll make DevOps love each other more. That's lovely. Great for me as a technical person, but whether that's easily quantifiable in terms of hard cash is a different question. But continuous delivery really speaks very business appealing language. Faster time to market. Higher application quality, better responsiveness to your customers. Sound like good things to have. We'd say no to those. And really the thing is, competitive pressure. If you're not doing them, one of your competitors probably is. We have some sessions, interesting sessions with like big banks, for instance, and they say quite candidly, look, or insurance companies. We used to be in a business where we were pretty unique. The barrier to entry was very high. You needed to buy lots of branches and staff them and get a lot of money. It's no longer that way anymore. 10 kids with some financing and a bunch of good software can build a bank. And they can put you out of business like tomorrow. And okay, that's an extreme example, but people live this fear. Whatever industry you're in, if you're not getting faster and better, somebody else probably is. And they can make you go bankrupt. So if this sounds a bit like a sort of scary shark story, yes, but it's true. And there are cases out there of companies to whom this has happened. So let this be a motivating factor that this is something I think we all need to do, not just because it's cool, but because there is a real competitive pressure out there to do this. I did the show of hands a second ago. So who's doing Agile? This is a sentence. I brought this up because continuous delivery appears in it, and it's my underlining. So our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. I'm not going to do the whole who is this, where is this from? If you get it right, excellent, good for you. You win the jackpot. This is principle number 1 from the Agile Manifesto. So if I were trying to be provocative, I would say something like, if you're not doing this, you're not doing Agile. You're doing something else. It's all good. You can have all the stickies on your board that you like. You can move them from to do into done. That's brilliant. If you're not continuously delivering valuable software to your customers, you're not doing Agile. And the other aside I wanted to add here is about continuous delivery in DevOps. Frankly, I don't care what you call it. nowadays, there's so much messaging out there. A lot of people jumping on the bandwagon. Pretty much any IT tool that seems to be built is a DevOps tool. Like if I build a screwdriver to open a rack, it's like a DevOps screwdriver. So I can fully understand that if you're approaching this space right now, it's totally unclear what is what. Everybody's piling in. Everybody wants to be part of the game. So yeah, this is new. Yeah, as I said, I don't really, whether you call it DevOps or continuous delivery or something completely different, I don't think it matters so much. What matters really is that you have an idea of why you're doing it. And I think this is one of the big challenges. A lot of people talk about continuous delivery and DevOps as if they were an end in themselves. But they're not. They're just means of achieving something. If you don't know what you're trying to do with DevOps, just being DevOps doesn't like magically give you business value. Getting stuff to your customers at better quality gives you business value, and having a quantifiable metric for that, that's how you do it. These are just means of doing it. So whatever you call it, make sure you know why you're doing them, and then you can come and sit at my table over lunch or visit me at the booth, and we can have long, heated discussions about what the right metrics are or what they could be for you and so on. But know what you're trying to get out of it. Okay, so I'll leave that intro for a second. All right, so there's 3 pillars that I would like to talk about that in my experience of trying to get this working in big organizations, both on the the user side and on like now the vendor side, trying to work with people to make this happen. That in practice I've seen are very, very important. So these are definitions. They're nothing to do with IT. They could be general, and I mean this is not. Yeah, we could write whole PhDs, and in fact, probably many PhDs have been written about the definitions of these things, so let's not go into that. Just for the purpose of this discussion, I'd like to define them in this particular way. Culture is a set of values, beliefs, and traditions. Practices are behaviors and actions that derive from these values and beliefs. You can tell I'm not American because of my OU spelling. I normally have to have a slide when I do this similar presentations in America. There's British spelling, so be careful. And tooling are instruments that are used to carry out these behaviors and actions. So if I talk about them in that particular order, then we're basically looking at the causal flow as being something like this. So we have culture, that's our primary thing. And that expresses itself through practices that we carry out on a day-to-day basis, which in turn make use of tools in order for us to live these practices. So an example, this is a little bit of an American example, I have to say. One of the things that comes to mind is, roasting marshmallows around a campfire. Frankly, I have no idea why anybody would want to do that because I think marshmallows are horrible. But different story. It's my girlfriend, she's American, big on this. It's a lovely thing to do in the summer. You all crowd around the campfire. You roast your marshmallows and it's all good. So here's an example. The culture thing is obviously roasting the marshmallows. Or the culture thing is the campfire, rather, the whole thing. The roasting marshmallows is a particular practice that goes along with that. And here's an instrument. Amazing. They come up with great stuff, don't they? Now, I always thought you do this on a stick. Right? This thing is called the real roaster. You stick it, and it's got you can retrieve your marshmallow from the middle of the fire, and you sort of reel it in like a fishing rod. It's amazing. I found this on Amazon. I think I typed in marshmallow roasting, and it came up with a real roaster. I love it. People are pretty creative. All right, so a few things about culture. So one of the things about culture is that once something has reached a cultural level, it's extremely resilient to challenges. Nobody would say, we're going to stop roasting marshmallows when the real roaster breaks, which I'm sure it does after 5 minutes. Oh, all right, well, we'll just put out the campfire. No. If you have something that you're motivated to do at a cultural level, you will find all kinds of ways of fixing problems with it because it's ingrained in your mentality. It's something you really want to do. There's an internal motivation to make this stuff work. Culture can be a good thing, and of course it can also be a bad thing in the sense that, if everybody buys very strongly into a culture, it becomes very difficult to advocate opinions or methods that might not quite be aligned with that. So there is a risk of groupthink here, and it's very important if when we boil this back down to IT, to allow for divergent opinions, because that's ultimately where progress comes from. But that's, again, I think we can have a long lunchtime discussion over this. It's really a sociology thesis that we should be talking about here.
And incidentally, of course, a lot of the stuff in the research about this has nothing to do with IT whatsoever. This is really an academic domain in its own right. And I think a lot more can be done. We can learn a lot more from that domain in terms of how to integrate culture into our particular processes. Because I know that happens in a lot of other areas of the business, but in IT we tend not to be particularly good at that. We want to reinvent that wheel ourselves as well. The problem with culture, of course, is whilst it's very resilient, it's very hard to impose from the top down. Ask the Soviet Union how well that worked out. History teaches us that culture is difficult to impose. And the thing about CD, and this is where it starts to become more relevant to the topic of the day, is that most organizations, based on the show of hands at the beginning, are not organizations where CD is already a deeply embedded culture. So to me, what do I mean by that? Just to give you a concrete example, what does a CD culture mean? It means something like, if the pipeline's broken, somebody feels bad about it. Someone on the team, and I don't care who it is, hopefully multiple people, but somebody feels like they really shouldn't be going home until that thing is fixed. If you don't have someone who feels bad about it, I get this, on Apache JCloud, I commit, and for one reason or another, I've become the sort of de facto maintainer of our CI and CD infrastructure. If it fails and goes on that wretched hanging test again, I feel bad. I make time in the middle of the night to try to fix it. It's just an internal motivational thing. I just don't feel good if it's not done. That's a cultural thing. But as I said, for most organizations, this is not the state where you're at. This is something you're trying to introduce. So what can we do about this? How can we go towards a system where this becomes part of your culture? So let's look at those three pillars that we started with: culture, practices, and tooling. And let's look at them in a different way. So I've turned them upside down here, and we can argue now because, of course, that doesn't really change the order of the pillars. I had some smart technical people point that out to me a few times. This is what we started with. We said culture is expressed through practices, is carried out using tools. But let's think about trying to invert this, look at this the other way around. Let's talk about tooling, which enables certain practices. And if these practices are good enough, or if they're beneficial enough, then the effects of these practices can give rise to a culture. They can give rise to a feeling that this is really a good thing we should be working towards and preserving. Now, so far, that's just so what are we doing here? It's just a game with words, right? Well, we've taken the boxes and we've turned the arrows around. Isn't that clever? Well, not really. What's the key thing that we're doing here? We're trying to invert the causal relationships. It's difficult to go one way. The other way tends to be, in the practice of CD, tends to be quite a lot easier. Because tooling is something that, unlike culture, is pretty easy to get in place, especially in our domain where a lot of the tools are free. Why start with tooling and practices? Yeah, they're easy to get up and running. So it's something you can really do in an hour after work. You can download Jenkins, hopefully Enterprise Jenkins, of course, Powerbeats, because it's cool. It does really nice things on Git validated merge. We use it all the time. JCloud's really cool stuff. It's low risk, right? Your boss is not going to come and say, hey, why are you downloading this free tool and spending half an hour of your own time doing this? So there's not a huge barrier to entry. There's not a huge risk to your organization, to your processes of doing this. So basically, you can kind of skunk works it out. Of course, you have to want to do this, or you have to have a mandate to do this. Or if you're the manager, then you have to give somebody the mandate to do this, or set that up as part of your company that people feel free to experiment. But this is not like, we're going to decide to go ITIL and then tomorrow everything has to change, right? We have to redo all our processes, fire half the people, hire new people. No, it's a very easy thing to do. And the other thing that's quite nice about this is it has effects you can demonstrate pretty quickly. Now, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. I mean, again, this will depend on everybody's individual situation, but in general, most of the people we speak to, even CI isn't something that's particularly well done, and certainly CD isn't something that's particularly well done. There are still manual builds, manual deployments, error-prone stuff happening, so there is low-hanging fruit that you can eliminate pretty quickly, and that also gives people a demonstrable benefit. So you can say, look, we went from like 5 failures every 10 deploys. I think we had a customer who was on like a 30, well, they were arguing whether their deployment failure rate was between 70 or 80%. And the manager walked in and he said, look, frankly, who cares? The number is far too high. So let's go do something about this. So there is a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can get here. And yeah, that motivates other people. You can tell them, show them that there's something in it for them. And you can show your bosses that there's hopefully like a real business case in here as well. But the one risk that I was going to talk about here, going through this pretty quickly, so maybe you get some free time after all, is a challenge I call quick win chasm. And so this typically plays out in kind of the following way. Somebody thinks CD is a bright idea, but everybody's busy in like the release engineering department, and they maybe don't have the right expertise. So you get this consulting company. They're experts in this kind of stuff. They come in, they build this wonderful pipeline system set up. It's cool. Everybody loves it. You hit a button, stuff deploys, wonderful. Like the website goes, has a cute picture of a kitten on it or whatever. The demo is. It runs fine, but nobody's really bought into it, and nobody really understands it all that well. There's been a bit of documentation and knowledge transfer, but it hasn't really become part of the core mentality of that group. And then at some point, something breaks, like the JVM upgrade that doesn't happen, or runs out of memory, and then one of the tests starts going flaky because something in the code has changed, and so on and so on. And if nobody's really motivated to fix it, then bits start getting switched off, and we start bypassing parts of the build. Sooner or later, you have this sort of crumbling edifice that even if it's still half running, nobody can really trust it anymore. So it's just this sort of Mayan ruin of a CD artifact that you have there. And well, the lesson from that, first of all, is that obviously tooling only goes so far. Even if to be clear, I started talking about stuff breaking just there. But that isn't just about stuff breaking. It's also that requirements change. Like the types of apps you'll write is going to change. What you need to do with those apps is going to change. Mobile, great example. Like I remember 5 years ago or so, like the people who wrote the traffic planner app for some company, that had a bunch of kids straight out of college or whatever. And it didn't really matter that much. It was like a toy. It was good to have. Now, for most companies, the mobile app is a core part of their enterprise delivery strategy. If you get 0 stars on your mobile app, that's really bad. So the requirements in terms of the testing and the validation and the process that have to go into that have changed dramatically over time. So it's not just about tooling being unreliable. It's also about making sure tooling remains fitness or fit for purpose, that you keep the fitness for purpose of your tooling up. So resilience of your tech infrastructure doesn't come from just hiring people, get it in. It comes from making this part of your DNA. I'm going to probably cut that phrase out because it's becoming so overused. But really, somebody has to feel like they own this, that they want to make it, keep it relevant, that the team believes it's giving them benefit, because that is what makes people want to continue with this. But it's of course not easy. Hence, quick win chasm. It's pretty tempting to say, okay, look, we got it up and running. Now we all have other fish to fry, so let's go fry those other fish, and then forget about the fact that this is not something you build once and then it's sort of perfect forever. You build it once, and you have to keep putting in the effort to maintain it over time. So this is something to try to cross, this quick win chasm. So 5 key points that I think in our experience we've learned to absolutely, I'm using this thing, am I? I'm walking over there all the time. Might as well put it down. 5 key points that we've learned are really important in terms of crossing this quick win. Well, first of all, you need management buy-in. Why? Because you don't want to work in your spare time to keep this thing up and running. I mean, it's great if you have the motivation to do it, but you shouldn't have to do this. Management should understand, and you should be able to get enough benefit out of it that they believe that this is a good thing and are willing to fund a project of ongoing maintenance and upkeep to make it valuable. Find someone who's been there. A lot of the conviction, the passion that you get for this kind of stuff comes from having someone who can talk about it with motivation and enthusiasm. It's very difficult to motivate yourself for something that you don't really understand and that you've never lived through. Having someone who can tell you how great this is if it really works. I mean, the most successful CD implementations I've seen are often, and the most dramatic turnarounds aren't in the LinkedIns or the Googles where they already do a lot of this stuff. It's in an organization that is really running a pretty traditional process, and then one person, a new hire, joins, and they come from a company that's been doing CD I know they have a nightmare awakening, and then it's amazing what you can change because they're just motivated to fix stuff. Create champions. In other words, give people, credit for doing this kind of stuff. Don't tell them it's like a waste of everybody's time. They should be focusing on like fixing, some setup or something. Give people motivation to do this, but also make things visible. The more people know what's going on, that doesn't mean like do the press releasey type stuff of only talking about the good stuff. There is going to be lessons to be learned here. Stuff will break, stuff will go wrong. You improve, that's part of it. But be open and transparent. The more people know that this is going on, create dashboards, all that kind of stuff. The more people know that these initiatives are going on, the more people are likely to buy in, but also be critical, have feedback, basically make it something that really works for you as an organization. Okay, so let's get a little practical here. We had 3 categories. You had tooling, practices, and culture. And I'm going to try and talk about all 3 of them and just give you a snapshot of certain things that, from my experience, are really effective in terms of making some of this stuff work. The slides are going to go online, by the way, so you don't necessarily need to take notes, although I am, of course, very flattered if you do. So for tooling, code review. Yes, very important for a couple of reasons. First of all, it increases the quality of your code, even though it takes a little more time. But it also creates much more shared understanding in the team of what is actually happening and what what you're actually writing. And this can become very, very mission critical. I was at Guild Group, the people who do these flash mob sales. And they're moving to a microservices architecture, which sounds great and modern and funky. And they have about 200 services or so. But they, along with everybody else, has not yet solved the problem of documenting how these services actually relate to and depend on each other. How do they solve that, I asked in a meetup. Oh, well, developers look at each other's code. It doesn't seem a hugely secure solution or scalable to me, but they just sort of expect the developers to know. And they only have 100 or 200 developers right now, so I guess that kind of works. But anyway, CI, yeah, obviously. I mean, continuous integration is a very important part of making CD work for you in a tool sense. CI is not the same as running a CI server, although you generally can use a CI server to do this. There's a great blog post called Continuous Integration on $1 a Day that talks about doing CI with a bell, an old machine, and a rubber chicken. Hopefully that gives you motivation to go read it. It's pretty funny. But the CI server certainly helps, especially one that supports sort of merge workflows where you can do CI on code that's not yet been committed to your main branches. And Jenkins does a really good job of that, for example. Deployment. Well, of course I would say that. But no, whether you use our tool to do this or whether you write scripts or whatever it is, of course I'd rather you use our tool because it's great, but automated deployment, if you're doing this stuff by hand, this is not going to be very, very good for you moving forward. Deployments, they're just one of these things that needs to be done very often in a very reliable way, and humans are terrible at that. So if you have manual deployments, yeah, I would suggest you get rid of those. If you have scripted deployments, you have whatever challenges come with script maintenance, but whatever you do, try to make sure this becomes a reliable and tested thing. Testing and quality. So one of the kind of forgotten children of this process, I do need to speed up a bit more. A lot of people we speak to right now, they talk about their CD initiative as building a pipeline, meaning automated environment provisioning, which I'm going to come to, deployment, CI, that's all good, but frankly it's plumbing as far as I'm concerned. The most important decision you have in any pipeline run is this code good enough to go live? How are you going to make that decision if you don't test the hell out of it? Or test as much as you need to test. But automated testing is hard, and it's expensive, and I can understand why it's a tempting subject not to address. But you really need to address it, because nothing kills a CD project as quickly as 4 successive high-profile failures in production, or 2, or 1, for that matter. So, it has to be on the agenda, and it has to be managed in some way. I mentioned environment provisioning. Yeah, in a pipeline, you're going to be trying to deploy your app multiple times in the pipeline. If it takes you 3 weeks to get an environment ready because they only have 6 environments, and the last team that used them, they left it in a totally chaotic state. So you have to spend half your time cleaning up the environment before you can test. Yeah, that's not going to allow you to accelerate a lot. Note that I don't, accelerating a lot depends also, it's relative to what your goal is. Not everybody is right for CD per commit. That doesn't work in many businesses. And for us, for example, our customers would scream if we told them to update every time we commit a line of code. We're not a SaaS vendor. So, frequency of a pipeline is not, there's not some magic goal that works for everyone. And of course, yeah, you need to orchestrate this stuff. It's all very well to have a little diagram of a pipeline on a flow chart, but some piece of code actually needs to invoke all the things in the right order, whatever that happens to be for you. But it doesn't just need to be able to orchestrate it, it should also be able to give you some of that insight and visibility. Going back to the track and trace story I was telling, yeah, I want to, as a business owner, I want to be able to take an issue number, stick it into my orchestration system, and get it's going to be released next week, roughly, if nothing goes wrong. It's currently in this phase. I would like to be able to see that kind of information. Monitoring, well, yes. It's all very well to have this pipeline that pushes stuff out into production, but you better know what's going on in production, because that is really where the data is coming from that tells you what you need to improve next time. I mean, the CD is ultimately all about this feedback cycle. So it's all very well to have the pipeline to push stuff into production, but you really need to know whether the change that you've made actually delivers the benefit that you're looking for. Am I getting more click-throughs? Are more people buying stuff? Are they happier? A very difficult one to measure, but there are some companies doing work in that area that do interesting kind of social feedback monitoring and all that kind of stuff. All right, let's crank up a gear here. Some practices. And these are pretty much related to the tooling, so to some extent they all blur into each other a little bit. Keep changes small. One of the key principles that Dave Farley and Jess Humble talk about this quite a lot in continuous delivery is that it's a more scientific approach to software development, in the sense that, if you make 800 changes and you release them all at the same time and people are unhappy, how are you going to know, or the system performs badly, how are you going to know which of those 800 changes actually were the problem? It's like a terrifying multivariate analysis problem. It's much, much easier to identify the cause of problems or improvements if you make single variable changes. So keeping changes small, and the CD pipeline obviously helps you do this because it reduces the overhead, the fixed cost, is a very important practice. Quality before functionality. That's easy to say and very hard to convince your bosses to do. But just because you can move a button from the left side to the right doesn't mean it's ready to go live. The system, ultimately your customers react to the quality of something. And if it takes too long, there are many aspects to quality: speed, performance, resilience, all these kind of things. But make sure that they become part of your definition of when is a particular feature good enough to go live. And I've seen many, many projects where, oh, well, it kind of works if I run it on my laptop. That's not what makes your users happy ultimately. So bear quality in mind. Put the testing up front. Well, that has two components. This goes back to what I was saying about testing being very important. Testing is, if you work more with automated testing, you will see that, especially if you're doing kind of spec-driven testing, which seems to be all the rage right now, hopefully you don't have the translation phase between somebody's written a document describing what the code should do, and then we have to write some tests to try to match that document. It's better to write the specification in terms of tests because A, you don't have the translation problem, and B, you can actually also hopefully tell when enough work has been done. I, as a developer, know very, very well that there's always a temptation to polish it a little bit more. And if you refactor it over here, then it looks nicer. Developers can go much further with a piece of functionality than is necessarily required at that point. So having tests that will tell you whether it's ready also allows you to determine when there's no more work that should be done right now. Get everyone involved early. This is really DevOps 101 stuff. Many a time have I been on projects where we designed this fantastic architecture, and then when like a couple of weeks when we were planning to go live, they described that it would never work in our production landscape because we had all these network issues or network constraints that weren't going to allow the communication to happen or whatever. Make sure everybody who knows how the system will actually run in the end actually gets involved in the project as early as possible. This goes back to what I was saying about the tests. Don't write any more code than is necessary, and try to move towards a dialogue with your users. They are the ones ultimately who will tell you whether what you're building is good. And they will do that in various ways, not necessarily by explicitly commenting, but also through their behavior. There's a really interesting article about John Lewis using Splunk for a lot of operational intelligence type stuff. Yes, Splunk is good, and all kinds of monitoring tools are good, but ultimately they can only give you a certain picture of what the systems are doing. The best place, arguably, to monitor behavior is in the system itself. So instrument the hell out of your code. You know what you want your users to achieve. You know what features you're looking for them to use. Well, go measure it, and don't expect some third-party tool to magically figure out what you know already. Delivery tooling is serious tooling. I'm sure the KK and the guys from CloudBees can tell you many fun stories about CI servers they discovered which were running on an ancient box that somebody found in a closet somewhere. It wasn't backed up and all this kind of stuff. That's fine if, well, it's never fine really, but that's okay if you're using it in a small setup, and if it goes down, it doesn't matter. Once you build a pipeline like this, it's serious stuff, right? If it goes down, your ability to deliver value is like, it's off. So treat it seriously. Make sure it's backed up. Make sure it's high performant. Make sure you have burst out capability if you need to the cloud, to wherever. Do capacity analysis on this. And if that means giving ownership of this platform to the quote unquote serious guys who know how to do this, then that may be what has to happen. All right, culture. 6 more minutes or so. We can always do better. Within reason, obviously. You're never generally done here. There's always something you can improve. But of course, that needs to be seen in relation to what our business goals are. So don't just improve for the sake of improving, but don't also say, well, we've put in all this effort right now. Yeah, we would like to deploy once every 3 hours, and we're now once every 2 days, but can't be bothered to go any further right now. There should be an open mind towards, if somebody has an improvement suggestion and you still have goals that you haven't met, take it on board, try it out. It's our service. They're our features. They're our users. It's not, we're building the service for those people over there, and it's the users of the business, so we really don't care about those. And the features, yeah, no, who's asking for those? They're the business's features. We all own this stuff together. We should take pride in the stuff we're delivering, hopefully. And it's fostering that sense of shared belief that this belongs to all of us, everybody involved in the pipeline, that also starts working toward this, well, you should feel bad if it doesn't go out there. It's a promise you've made with your team to deliver this stuff. It's not working. You should feel as though you've broken a promise. Us includes the business. This is a pretty difficult one in a lot of organizations. But yes, of course you can look at them as your customer, but that brings with it all the kind of challenges of, well, you have to be polite, and you can't say, can't say really the things, you can't be open and honest and transparent, and that's really difficult. The business needs to buy into this, and that's one of the untold challenges here, is that the business quite likes often the idea of like not having to interact with IT for 6 months in a row, because it takes time and effort. But that doesn't work if you're going to do continuous delivery. You can't have your cake and eat it. If you want fast-paced interaction with your customers, you also need to be prepared to invest the time. But if you can do that, if you can say, look, let's try and work on this together, then you can hopefully also make them feel that they're part of the team, but you're part of their team as well. Tools work for the team. I could talk much longer about this because it's a very interesting one. There's a lot of research in this area from the space of highly, what's it called? Like nuclear power plants, and highly resilient, very, very important automated systems. There's a lot of research where these tools have to work together with users about where things go wrong, and failure analysis of these systems like autopilots and stuff like that. And typically what they find is that stuff tends to go wrong when people think humans make mistakes, so we have to cut humans out of the process. Because that's when you get automation that is highly authorized to do all kinds of scary stuff with no ability for humans to tweak it. It just takes off. It just takes over and takes off and does whatever it wants, and it doesn't really tell you what it's doing. There's a very interesting story from Netflix. They managed to cause a crazy production outage by building one of these systems and not telling the support team what the system was supposed to do. But I don't have time to tell that now. You can come and ask me about that if you're interested. The tools that you're putting in place here work for the team. They have to make the team's life better. That means that they have to provide insight, and the team has to be able to control them ultimately if they need to. This is not magic automation. It's a silver bullet. You wheel it in, and then you don't have to care about the people anymore because the tools will magically get everything right. And it goes back to the fitness for purpose thing I was saying earlier. They may be perfect for now, but you have to adapt them just as your organization adapts. Nobody goes home if the build is broken or the delivery system is broken. That's an old adage from Agile. So getting started. Final few things here. Yeah, lots of great ideas, but okay, what do you do now? You have to go back. I have this feeling from conferences all the time. You go there, you get highly motivated, and tomorrow you're back at the desk. And there's an issue to be solved. So what can you do practically day to day? Do a value stream analysis. It's a lean manufacturing technique. A lot of people here doing Agile, so you probably know it already. It's a very simple technique for actually, first of all, documenting what your process is today and getting an idea for where are we spending the time, where are the problem points in that process, where could we even start improving if we wanted to. And ideally, approach it with a mindset of the way we're doing it today isn't perfect. Things can be improved. Whether we have the time and the resources and the budget to do that right now is a totally different question. We have to take it step by step. But start an exercise like this from the perspective of nothing is sacred in the sense of we have to keep doing it this way because that's the way we're always doing it. Define incremental goals. Don't try to boil the ocean because that never works unless you're incredibly lucky. Say, for instance, if we had 2 days in which we could work on stuff, what are the 2 things we would want to do that would deliver the biggest benefit in those 2 days? Look at incremental goals and don't try to go from manual releases once every 6 months to releases per commit fully automated in that's the only step that we're going to make. That's not going to work. Make things a little bit better. And once you get to a certain point, you might find that there's no incentive to move any further because that's enough. Or you might decide that we want to move even faster, then you want to go further than that. Start with tooling. Why? Because I'm a tools vendor? No. Because it's the low-hanging fruit stuff. It's the stuff that is really easy to get started with. If you've already gone a long way with your tooling, great. Move on to the next stuff. But tooling, if you're starting from a fairly bare-bones scenario, is the really easy one to go. Testing and quality, well, make sure this is an agenda item. Don't shy away from backfilling of testing. Yeah, if you're starting with a brand new project, it's pretty easy. You start building tests up front. The cost doesn't seem so big. If you have a big existing project, start figuring out what tests you need. And don't go for we're going to do all the functional testing now, and then we're going to do all the performance testing. No, slice it the other way. What are the most essential pieces of functionality and performance that we need to test? Don't add tests in terms of categories because you're going to add lots and lots of tests that don't deliver a huge amount of value. Do the most valuable tests first across all categories and then add additional tests. As you can see, these get progressively more complex to do. Adapt your architecture. If you have one enormous monolithic EAR-file or .NET application that downloads half the internet and is 2 gigabytes in size, and I've seen a lot of those, yeah, that's going to make it very hard to make small changes. Just because it'll take 45 minutes to compile, that's already a threshold on how fast your pipeline can run. So certainly think about this. But microservices, SOA service type architecture is kind of the way to go right now. So I think a lot of you are probably looking at this already. And get business focus in here. I'm not going to talk too much about it because I've said it already. All right, that's my time up. You can get lots of information from us. The formatting has gone a little weird on this slide, but that happens sometimes. I'm at the front if you have more questions. Thank you very much.